Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to the Thought Square podcast. We have an interesting guest today, and that is Dr. Salman Butt. He has done a PhD in chemical biology from Imperial College London. Am I right? Yes, alhamdulillah. And he's also our dawa man, you can say. Not the dawa man, but he is involved in dawa in an international capacity. He works with the Islam 21C, and it's a very famous website. The reason we brought him here today is because we did a podcast earlier with brother Sabboor Ahmad regarding their upcoming book, The Death of Neo-Darwinism, Dawkins versus Noble. So in that, that book is basically by two authors. One of them is Sabboor himself, right? And he covers the part about the philosophy of science and the philosophy of biology, including in this debate, right? And the second part regarding the technical biology of it, the chemical biology of the stuff related to it, was done by our very own Dr. Salman Butt. So, alhamdulillah, we are honored here to bring him together with us in this podcast. And let's discuss about this topic again, right? So, Brother Salman, first of all, how are you doing?
I'm well, thank you. Jazakumullah khair for the invite.
Enjoying Lahore so far?
Yes, very good, alhamdulillah.
Any other additional butt cries? Butt cries?
Yeah. Alhamdulillah. Yeah, I went to Butt Cry last time I came. I haven't been yet this time, but
all right. So I heard you're going to Faisalabad and Gujranwala. Yeah,
yes.
There will be lots of food there. Yeah, so inshallah. No worries, inshallah. So let's begin regarding our discussion. So, Brother Salman, just a summary of what the book is about in general. So, for example, in a kind of a revision or simplified manner, in whatever capacity you can tell us that what motivated is this project, right? And for example, from your perspective, were you motivated or you were told by somebody to intervene in this? What's the story behind it first?
Okay, Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu alhamdulillah. Just one day, Sabboor Ahmad, he just gave me a call and he said, look, I've got this idea. Do you want to kind of contribute to it? Most of the work was done by Sabboor. And he just asked me to contribute a bit here and there, have a read of his sections and then write a chapter or two of my own. It's basically about, as you've already done, you probably discuss it to death with him, but a debate between Dennis Noble and Richard Dawkins. And the thing is, to an unsuspecting, viewer, it may look like just a friendly chat between two fellows. However, what Sabboor has done is he's kind of unveiled a lot of the subtext, a lot of the consequences of bits and pieces here and there to reveal that actually this is like a gladiatorial contest for the soul of biology. Okay, so what we're seeing here is these two men are a representation of two conflicting views in biology and to arguably the public understanding of science itself. Okay, Dawkins on one hand represents a kind of a reductionism in biology, which was quite common in the 19th and 20th centuries. Dennis Noble, on the other hand, he represents, and he's dedicated his whole life to researching what we might call a holism. Okay, the opposite of reductionism. In this case, a systems biology. Okay, and Sabboor basically details that kind of gladiatorial kind of contest playing out in the field of evolutionary biology. So the traditional reductionist sense, Dawkins represents Neo-Darwinism, that has its kind of usul and it has its dawabit and it has its kind of pillars of its faith and its dogma. And Dennis Noble represents what people as different names. The third way is one of the, I think, what he's mentioned in the book. Just a different understanding of or towards evolutionary biology. And
so, just for the audience, a bit of background is that, for example, the Dawkins thesis is somewhat reductionist in the sense that the genes and the molecules basically control the organism and what direction it will take and how it will go about its business, right? And a lot of the events are much more, you can say, gene focused, right? And the implication of that is regarding much of the popular literature, much of the background or assumptions, even preconceived notions, are formulated behind using this idea of gene-centered theory, right? And on the opposite end, what the system biology or the holistic biology tries to understand things in a way that the organism has the power, the shell also has the power to dictate what it's trying to do, right? So it's not just the component or the biological cell in there that controls it, but the organism itself, based on the environment, based on several other factors, can gear its own systems, its own molecules towards a direction, or proteins towards certain directions of where it wants them to be. So this two-way view, and I'm glad also the Royal Society of Britain, they also have tried started to publicize these lectures associated with these, who are people much more associated with system biology as well. So that's a good ordeal, we can say.
That's why Sabboor brought me in, because even my background, my PhD was, I experienced this firsthand, this kind of tussle between reductionism and systems biology. And
so what was your PhD about in a sense?
Yeah, so my PhD was in technically the Department of Chemistry, but I was doing chemistry, biochemistry. My PhD was in photosynthesis, in not just photosynthesis, but one enzyme in photosynthesis. Okay.
All right.
Ribulose 1,5-bisphosphate carboxylase oxygenase, or Rubisco for short. प्यार से Rubisco कहते हैं. Yeah. The nickname is Rubisco.
Yeah, we've heard about Rubisco in your basic A-levels biology. They teach you the photosynthesis.
Hasn't changed much.
Yeah. So what about Rubisco you were trying to find out?
So the thing is, I look at it from the perspective of, in the context of reductionism. Okay, so reductionism, it tries to understand things by breaking it down into smaller and smaller parts until you can characterize something and then build a picture up from bottom up. This is one enzyme, and this happens to be a very slow enzyme, or so we were told. And
for an enzyme.
Yeah, so like a turnover.
It's pretty slow for an enzyme.
So a turnover,
catalyst, it's very slow.
So a turnover of typically like 1 to 3 reactions per second or something, right? And the plants get over this by producing loads and loads of it. Okay, so it's also the most abundant enzyme on Earth, and represents like probably the I forgot the percentage, but a significant amount of the biomass of a plant or an algae or whatever is Rubisco, because there's so much of it. The theory would go therefore that if you can just increase the efficiency or the speed or the effectiveness of this enzyme, just 1%, you could drastically change how fast
photosynthesis might occur. Oh yeah, or the plant itself.
Because Rubisco is the entry point. I forgot to say what it does. It's the entry point of carbon into the biosphere. So every carbon atom in your body, your food, your everything, it at one point or another, it went through this enzyme. Yeah, because it was out there one day, it was absorbed by a plant, turned into glucose or whatever, stored in a fruit. The fruit fell down, an animal ate it.
And now
you ate the
everywhere.
animal, and now it's inside you. So those carbon atoms, they went through Rubisco at one point. So if you can make it faster, in the old kind of reductionist biology sense, then you can make plants grow faster. If you can make plants grow faster, you can feed more people quickly. You can provide their energy needs, biofuels, fiber, clothes, and all that kind of stuff. And also, if you're making plants grow faster, you're speeding up the rate at which CO2 is being sequestered from the atmosphere. Hence, saving the world. So my PhD was basically in saving the world. I didn't do it. I mean, maybe someone would take, maybe I added a step in that direction.
Of course.
But what I found was, not just me, obviously, this is the whole kind of field. What we found was the promises of the traditional way, the reductionist biology, weren't really coming true. Okay, you could do things that you could genetically engineer it to make it faster, technically, theoretically, but the plant wouldn't grow
or
any
work
faster.
that way. Yeah.
So what happened was we started to see things more as the emergence of systems biology, systems that look at plants, look at organisms as systems, as vast networks of movements of
tweaking and whatnot, right?
Metabolites in and out, and you get different scales and levels of function and behavior. Okay, so this is an example of just reductionism versus holism or systems biology. All right.
So
now,
there,
in the
there
last
are
century,
lots of factors that are not considered in when we are tweaking in these things, right?
yeah, that's the thing. So in the last century, reductionism was a dominant kind of way of thinking, not just for biology, but for many things. Okay, again, reductionism is what? To reduce a problem to its smaller and smaller parts until you can make sense of it and then build up the whole picture that way. Now it makes sense where this came from, okay, and people have tried to look at the different intellectual or philosophical foundations of this. So, for example, Descartes was credited with, this theory or this approach, to break things down to
in a way,
constituent
induction,
parts.
you can say that, for example, something is general, you reduce it down to bits in order to study the specific elements of it, right?
Yeah.
And when you understand it, and then you generalize based on what you studied, the small part.
That's
that you
part of it,
reduced
yeah. But also Newton, for example, Newton showed that you can, reduce certain things to beautiful like laws. And those laws could then be applied to
anywhere around the universe.
Predict the movement of gigantic celestial bodies. That's the second thing. And the third thing in the in the last few centuries was the proliferation of more and more advanced kind of clockwork and watches with tiny mechanisms and cogs. And you can see that the small cogs, spin around and they can be reassembled and disassembled and changed and tweaked. And this contributed all to people's understanding that, okay, everything must be like this. All of life must be like this, must be just, made up of tiny and tinier cogs that you just can't see, but there must be that kind of... basically what they're looking at is that they're privileging a scale, that the lower scale exercises an upward causation on higher and higher scales. So, and that's Dennis Noble, he likens that to, Galileo and Copernicus and, this idea of, okay, the earth is the center of the universe. Then the sun is the center of the universe. And then, wait a second, now we say, well, there is no center of the universe. It's all relative, right? There's no privileged center. Likewise, he says there's no privileged scale. Okay, it makes sense when in some scenarios that, okay, a watch, the central smallest cog turns this and then that turns that and then that turns that. But then what you get, however, in more and more complex scenarios is emergent behavior. You have, on higher scales, you have certain behaviors that look like they actually, wait a second, there's purpose behind this, and they exercise downward causation to smaller and smaller scales. So, for example, like a sentence, a word, okay, small words are put together to make a sentence. Reductionism. But sometimes this context of the sentence exercises downward causation to make one word
more important.
No, to let you to alter the meaning of one word.
Yes.
Like if I say, I don't know, I like this cup because it's light. Okay, the word light has different meanings.
Yes, I've seen the light. So, for example,
but when you put it in the sentence, now that sentence kind of alters or shapes the intended meaning that you had
Yeah.
for
Light
that
is
thing.
entering the room, for example. This mic is light. Or, for example, I've seen the light. All these three sentences alter the meaning of the word light, right? So, this is a good example of this. On another famous debates happening with the theologians, right? Between the apparent meaning and the metaphorical meaning, and that's
Yeah.
kind of
Not
the
to get too
example of
much
that.
bogged down in this example, but it's just to show that, look, there's no privileged scale, he says, basically. So that's systems biology or holism. Systems biology is holism's answer to reductionism. Okay, so it requires quite a resilient character, because it's almost irresistible to keep breaking something down until it's at a level where you can understand it. But that doesn't mean that's what is actually there. That's the truth. That's the reality outside of your mind. That's just you're breaking something down to a level where you can understand. And I always say to people, beware of things that make sense. The world is under no obligation to make sense to you. Okay? Just because something makes sense doesn't mean it's true. Okay? We do this all the time in science. I sometimes say science is about telling ethical lies. We tell kids in school, atoms are little balls with little electrons whizzing around, and there's these electrons are in shells, and there's this many electrons in this cell, and that this many in that shell. We tell, we know this is probably not the case. Okay, pretty much sure that this is not really how things work.
Regarding momentum. Have you seen that?
A video regarding momentum?
Yeah, a student, he tries to map out everything that he was in high school, and he understood the momentum was just this simple formula, and by the time he went to the university, the entire meaning of life changed. So
yeah. I mean, some kids get annoyed, and some students get annoyed by that. Like, they was lying to us. But the point is that's you have to be responsible in your communication of science. Sometimes you can reduce things to simple metaphors or simple ethical lies, but you have to be careful not to make people think that this is actually, revealed truth. This is just a way to explain and describe something according to the data that we have at the moment. This is a now explanation. There could be tomorrow could be another and new now explanation, but it's like a model for you to kind of make predictions and be useful and so on and so forth. That's the key. Responsible science versus kind of dogma.
Yeah.
And Noble appears to represent responsible science, and Dawkins appears
represents the dogma.
represent dogma.
I mean, that's very quite clear. And if you even think about how the science is taught anywhere, including here, right? The teachers themselves are not aware of all these discussions, right? Even their teachers, and especially what does a kid interact with? First, he interacts with the high school teacher, right? And you know that he is not that qualified. I mean, he's qualified, but it's not to the capacity. He understands the variation in them, right? Sometimes even the teacher, we cannot trust that that person in the high school or the even the lower secondary school will be able to responsibly deliver the complexities or you can say the subjectivity in the matter of science. A lot of naturalism is trickled down in our teaching systems and capacities. So that's another issue regarding that. How do you teach responsible science? Because that is what actually makes or breaks something, right? Because kids are gaining this information, and there is a level of black and white thinking over there. And if a person who is responsibly teaching these elements, right, they can broaden their mind, their perspectives as well. So another thing, yes, I had to highlight. So, for example, I was teaching my students regarding genetics and inheritance and whatnot, and much of it regarding how the eye color, right, is there is a gene, there is a two alleles, right? Either will be red and either will be
Mendelian.
blue, right?
Hopefully not red.
Not red, yes, sorry. Either it will be brown
Yeah.
or black, right? One will come from the mother and the other will come from the father. But the reality of it's far more complex than it. The gene is there are multiplicity of the genes itself, the alleles themselves, and the environmental effect that can alter it, right? And we also give it. This is the example of a discontinuous variation, although that is a partly continuous variation. And this is something that we,
even the notion of gene is under question now.
Yeah.
Like when you teach kids, and to be fair, I mean they do say that, okay, this is Mendelian inheritance. This is like the very certain traits are very simplified, very what the Human Genome Project showed was actually that's probably not how most things work. The vast majority of traits and behaviors and things about you work. You've got more predictive power looking at someone's socioeconomic conditions than you do by looking at their genome. Yes. Their DNA, and that's the thing. That's one of the kind of touch points between Neo-Darwinism and the third way, or Dennis Noble's kind of response to that, and that is that genes are not that, DNA is not as important and as causative as Neo-Darwinists and people like Dawkins say. So to give the example of that, the reductionism and the holism, or the systems biology on the other hand. So reductionist kind of view is the central dogma of molecular biology. It's drilled into us from undergraduate level. DNA makes RNA, makes protein. Okay, there's one way causation. And the selfish gene kind of hypothesis and the kind of cool sounding models and those stories and those kind of simplified ways of looking at the metaphors, they at some point they became like a central core dogma of many people. They like their innermost beliefs about how everything works, and even in public culture and discourse, that our genes are everything. Like your genes are in control, and your body is just some lumbering robot that's kind of exists to perpetuate your genes. Yeah. Whereas Dennis Noble, on the other hand,
causal determinism in biology, the sociobiological determinism, basically, right? It's motivated by these ideas even much more. I mean, it gives substantiation to, you can say, some naturalistic explanation of everything and cause effect chain. And
the thing with naturalism is, and even atheism, I argue that this is harder for an atheist to justify, right? Because this requires some really amazing master coder to actually code some amazing self-replicating, all-encompassing, governing code that is able to do all of this that we see around us. That requires like a huge miraculous intervention of some sort, compared to what systems biology shows, which is far more, I think, easy for an atheist to accept.
He can utilize that example that Darwinism caused this complex system, hit and miss and hit and trial, and that hit and trial and randomness element can be much more be supported with the systems theory, as opposed to, you can say, an intelligent design, the first stroke of luck and all that elements with the gene,
Yeah, I mean, because so systems biology's response to that, so Dennis Noble's response to that is, well, we know now that, and many, decades of amazing kind of discoveries in biology and progress shows that genes are not in control. Genes are an important part. Your DNA is an important part of you, your cells, but it's like books in a library. Someone has to go and take them.
Yeah.
Someone has to write them. Someone has to fix them. Someone has to reorganize them. And we see our cells and organisms doing mass reorganization events of our DNA. We see directed, evolution of our cells. When a COVID particle comes into contact with some of your immune cells, it sets off a a chain of events which makes your immunoglobulin cells, some of your immune cells, tell the DNA evolve, mutate, make loads of different antibodies, so we can keep testing which one of these
it makes
attaches
more
to these.
sense even in Darwinian perspective to have directed mutagenesis as opposed to undirected or random one.
Noble argues Darwin wasn't a neo-Darwinist.
Yeah,
he wasn't like this reductionist. He was, he was still kind of looking for other higher kind of level systems.
Regarding Lamarckism.
Lamarckian, yeah. So that's the other thing. You probably discussed that to death with Sabboor anyway. About Lamarckian evolution. So one of the central pillars of Darwinism, Neo-Darwinism, beg your pardon, is that there's one-way traffic. This Weissman barrier that your germ cells, your reproductive cells, only mutations there have an effect on the phenotype of future generations. Not that you might do something in
order
your life,
to mutate your own,
or you might experience something, and that experience gets transferred into your germ cells, and that's something that is kind of like haram for, it's kufr for Neo-Darwinism. But it happens, and we've seen more and more examples of that happening. So you can acquire traits that are basically inherited by future generations.
So in the book itself, what examples have you discussed regarding this scenario? Did you delve deep into the chemical biology of some of the examples of it, showcasing what's happened, or what are your chapters about essentially?
So, for example, what I was asked to talk about my research, my PhD, and then look at some examples. And reflections on the debate.
So one of we already discussed the Rubisco one, right?
Yeah. So for example, remember I said reductionism. It kind of tries to reduce us to smaller and smaller cogs, and the smallest cogs are influencing and causing change in the higher cogs. This led many people to think of, and it's one of those kind of ethical lies that and metaphors that we tell children, that cells are like these little balls of water, little bags that are with stuff sloshing around in it, and just some metabolites wander into the active site of an enzyme, and then the reaction happens, and then the product of that reaction then finds its way to another enzyme just by diffusion and moving around, and then that's how reactions happen. That's not how many reactions happen. Okay, what we found is, and even myself when I was purifying, Rubisco, it's funny thing. Every day I would get out of the train station and go to a supermarket to get some cabbages, and I'd buy the cabbages, take them to the lab, and then for the next few hours grind it up and purify Rubisco myself, and just do some experiments on that. I found that much easier than growing plants. When I needed to kind of get loads of experiments done, I just buy them from the supermarket.
Yeah, I should have thought of
it. So I found that you would get Rubisco, but you'd also get heavier thing containing Rubisco as well. And this is one in line with many other observations many other people have made, and that is many processes that require or they require many different steps, like a pathway, like the Krebs cycle, like photosynthesis. Carbon dioxide comes here, it gets turned into this thing, the metabolite number 1, that gets go to another enzyme, that goes to metabolite number 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6. What we found was all these enzymes, rather than being like freely sloshing about in solution, they're actually stuck together in multi-enzyme complexes. So the metabolite, so the carbon dioxide, for example, comes to the first enzyme. It reacts. The reaction's catalyzed, and the product of that reaction is directly channeled to the active site of the next enzyme. and then the next one, and then the next one.
There is this, you can say, globular compound multi structure of enzymes.
Yes.
And the atom will come there,
Yeah.
and it will, one after the other. Basically, the
Yeah.
active site from switching from one to the other, then the next, then the
Yes,
next.
yes.
And the end, you'll get the product. Right?
Yes, yes.
So, basically, the opposite of what we teach, in a sense.
Yeah.
The standard lock and key or whatever the.
Yeah, I mean, it's
model.
not subject necessarily to like Brownian motion or diffusion. They're not like, I mean, it would still happen, but this is an example of an emergent behavior from higher levels constraining and exercising downward causation onto lower levels. Yeah. And this takes us to one of the definitions of being alive and being of life, according to Dennis Noble. It's really interesting. He says it's harnessing stochasticity. Stochasticity is what basically like randomness. Okay, if you just have a bunch of stuff sloshing around, you're gonna have maybe this much of that item, that product produced. But what we see is the way organisms are organized is they harness this randomness and make the probability of the desired outcome far greater than what it would be if it was just random. Yeah. Purpose is showing purpose, is showing control, is showing design from the organism's perspective down to the reactions. So you get a much better bang for your buck, right? So what we see is now cells are not just these bags of water. They're complex, not machines, because that implies that mechanistic kind of, tinier and tinier cogs. They're like cities. They have their, police departments. They have their motorways. They have their transport system. They have their waste disposal systems. They have their growth, their metabolism systems. They have their information systems. These cities. They even have their immigration systems. To find the things out and then get rid of the foreign invaders and all that kind of stuff.
And cells are Brexit.
Yes. Yeah. Let's go there.
Cells.
So, this is an example of systems behavior, and it doesn't. And the cells use the DNA and tell the DNA what to do. Yeah, they like a sheet of music. Dennis Noble refers to it as a score. Okay, music. Nothing happens until someone gets a piano and starts reading and starts playing tuck 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 whatever. He's reading the music and utilizing it. Likewise with DNA, right? It's there, it's important, but someone has to read it. The cell has to say, okay, go and get that piece of DNA for me. It's like a book in a library. But what people like Dawkins basically are saying is the library was created by the books. Yeah. So they have a nice, dry, safe place to live, which is
it doesn't make
sounds
sense.
odd.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that we discussed.
An interesting example was given by another lecturer. I forgot his name. It says that if you look at it, for example, how many coding genes does a banana have? It's like 36,000 genes. How much a human has? Like 19,000, right? So you say if you look at that, the coding regions of a more simpler organism is a lot more than that of you can say a human, right? But what's happened is that these 19,000 codes for more proteins than the other one, and one of the reason being is that those the non-coding region is involved in the coding process itself. So non-coding region, right, utilizes external elements from the cell, right, which are external to the DNA, and that gear him to alter the state of the coding region when it is outside the nucleus. So after it's outside the nucleus, right, then there's at that point there are certain interventions either from the non-coding area and from external, you can say, enzymes or elements of the cells that alter what would be translated from the ribosome. So this was a very complex and new idea, and recently the 2024 Nobel Prize was given to this idea for the elements, this type of elements and interventions in non-coding regions and the external elements aiding this process. So this is something interesting to think about in a sense that how the external elements are gearing how our proteins are coded much more capacity. So one, basically what we believe that this one protein, it says it codes for multiple proteins, right? And not just one linear pathway. So one region would not just code for one protein, but multiple protein, depending upon how the cell intervenes with it, right? So this was an amazing study for me as well. And this is in support of the system biology. And I'm glad on a global level, you can say if a Nobel Prize is awarded to research like that, means this thought is coming
more
mainstream.
More and more people are getting Nobel Prizes for this. I think McClintock, I think she won a Nobel Prize. And this, so, it's shifted. And that's why I think one of the subtitles of the book is the death of Neo-Darwinism. Yeah.
And it's good. I mean, people can openly say this now without,
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. But the thing is,
it's a catchy title.
I was discussing this with Sabboor as well, that we want to make sure that, from a Dawa perspective or from a Muslim perspective, it should be neither here nor there, right? Because just because somebody's an atheist with a very dogmatic and a very human, a very cultural kind of issue, has hijacked a certain theory or model to, justify their own atheism, or to proselytize their beliefs about some, God or their beliefs about whatever. It doesn't mean we should invest so much time and energy or make that link as though, okay, now Neo-Darwinism has been disproven. Now, okay,
therefore God exists. Basically, God of the gaps problem, right?
Yeah, or even like the opposite, like now we've refuted atheism. Atheism didn't have a leg to stand on, even if Neo-Darwinism was true. Right? Like I said, it requires more of a jump to say that there's this magical, near omnipotent, omniscient kind of code that does everything and controls our whole bodies and everything, even the what I'm saying to you now. That requires more of a huge jump, especially if you're saying it came out of nothing. That you'd have to add so many weird and strange beliefs about the way in which it came about to sustain the belief in atheism, which is a cultural human product anyway. Atheism is sociology. Okay, atheism is, the rejection of the church and European trauma, manifesting in a rejection of these types of things.
There is a level of naturalism and in the subtext involved in both the parties, right? There is a level of religious naturalism as well, right? The people who, for example, utilize science to prove or disprove God, or it's the thesis, it is much more just like how Dawkins said, Darwinism makes me much more, you can say, motivated. What did he say? I think
he's an intellectually
satisfied atheist, right? Now he's seeking intellectual,
which is basically tasalli.
Yes,
for himself.
So intellectual, even an atheist, if he's seeking intellectual satisfaction in some scientific theory or naturalistic theory, and same goes for those people, right? The religious people as well, right? Who are finding some sort of faith in a scientific theory. In a sense, both are having a subcontext of naturalism in their mind when they're dealing with these topics. Like, for example, the person who's finding science in the Quran, right, would be the same as Dawkins saying that he's, both of them are seeking science to prove their beliefs. Yeah. So in a way, they both.
I wouldn't say it's naturalism, though. I would say it's just,
in a
scientism.
Way, yeah, scientism in a sense. Yeah.
So
they're giving it superior authority.
Yeah.
In their mind. So anything additional you might want to add regarding the research?
So we talked about this multi-enzyme complex, cells, the different layers of causality, different levels. Okay, larger scales exercising causation on down lower scales, like the cell, for example, controlling the DNA and altering the DNA. The thing is that the reason why, or one of the reasons why Dawkins and kind of atheism and kind of new atheists, they went down this path of reductionism, is it requires a level of humility and resilient character to resist the temptation to keep kind of breaking things down until you understood something. Now I understand it. This is the truth. It requires certain elements of character and akhlaq. This is something they don't focus on. Okay, and this is one of the reasons I've noticed. This is one of my theories here, that probably this is one of the key reasons I think that it's so close to their hearts. They held on to it, and sometimes very, I won't say violently, but they'll exercise a lot of bullying tactics, a lot of vicious kind of language and behavior, trying to get biologists that disagree with them cancelled and all that kind of stuff.
No intelligence allowed.
Yeah, because they're just behaving like a European religion, right? They have their dogmas, they have their blasphemy, they have their, they even have a notion of original sin. Yeah, we're all born selfish. Yeah, right. This is Dennis Noble's joke, not mine. I have to give him credit for that. But I think that's the reason why it appealed to them so much, because
it gives them the sense of purpose
and certainty, and just that my nafs, now that once I understand something, that is truth. That is, whereas it requires humility to say, don't know, this seems like a good explanation, but there's probably so many things we don't know, and character influences maybe in a bit like there's no privileged direction of causality or whatever in some scenarios, or likewise a person's character, a person's akhlaq, a person's nafs, his ego, his humility, his arrogance, these impact his thinking or her thinking and what they perceive to be truth, right? The heart, the metaphysical heart, the qalb, right? If your heart is rusted, you can't see the truth. Right? If you look after your akhlaq, you look after your ibadah, if you look after your character, your humility, your humbleness, your intelligence improves. Okay? You are a more aqil person. You're able to resist the primitive urges of, the nafs or the desires or this and that. And I see that in systems. The people that, not the systems for the sake of systems, but people that are doing responsible science. Okay? That's what I always put it down to. I remember one of my professors at university, I think my tutor, he was, he would always say, science is about telling a story. Yeah. I said it in a more Batamiz way, like telling lies, but it's about telling a story. Here's the story we can currently,
map out based on the available data.
Based on what we know now, or what we think we know now. But tomorrow it could change. Yeah. And this humility, it actually unlocks growth. This is a growth mindset. Yeah.
That's the power of science is actually here in this humility. And this is what...
but the dogma of like new atheists and people like that is they've held science back. Right? And we've seen this. Unfortunately, in Noble, his explosive influential work, it started coming out after 2004, after he retired, as an active leader of an active lab, because he was afraid of the salaries of the people in his team, right? He was afraid that if they did research in these areas, and that area, or they publicized it too much, they would just, he has someone could be a martyr himself. But if he's responsible for, students and staff members and faculty and all of that, then that's not a risk that you're willing to take.
And it happened to a lot of the key scientists in biology as well, right? Not just Nobel. Yeah, there's a document.
In any science, in any field.
Yeah.
Not just science.
Yes.
In any field, economics, politics, whatever. It requires humility to say, okay, we don't know everything. Let's all learn, and let's develop a methodology to test whose story is
more qati versus more
dhanni. There you go.
So Jazakallah khair, Dr. Salman. Thank you very much. It was very informative, and thank you for coming to our podcast. Thank you for coming to Pakistan.
My pleasure.
And discussing this book as well, right? I would reserve my copy, please. So I require.
I'll send you one before I get one.
Please send me one before you get one.
Yeah.
All right. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.